Welcome back to Gathering Folds. Today we're going to do a tutorial on a pattern that uses only closed and open triangle twists, but in a really interesting arrangement where we'll see pattern twists on both sides of the paper in clusters of 6 and clusters of 4. And this video is going to be more like one of the lessons in Tessellation Starter Sequence, Tessellations by Tiles, Tessellation Academy, my paid courses, than a typical tutorial that I usually do here on YouTube. So we're going to start today with a crease pattern and take a look. So this is how my crease patterns come in my ebooks, in my pattern compilations, pattern bundles. And this is showing the pattern, it's an infinite pattern, on a 64 division grid. And zooming in to the very center, I do have some bolder lines marking the very center and every 8 grid spacings, so you can count out how many spacings you want based on how many repeats of the pattern you would like to get. And the first thing to do is to decipher what's going on in the crease pattern, just from the perspective of what is even present. And the tool that I have that helps with that is a second page with the crease pattern called the skeleton. And that, when I turn it on in Inkscape, doesn't always snap into place. But what the skeleton shows is a dot in the center of each twist. So you can see that, for example, this triangular area in the center is not a twist because it does not have a dot. And you can also see that this triangular area, outlined in valley folds, is a twist because it does have a dot. It's a closed triangle twist on the back side of the paper, where these outlined in mountains are closed triangle twists on the front. And likewise, we have open triangle twists on the front and on the back. And it's not a simple arrangement. So there's 3 groupings of twists going on. I've got this group of 6 in the middle. You can see that group of 6 repeats in various parts of the pattern. Then I have this group of 4 triangle twists that are all on the back, and that group also repeats at various parts of the pattern. And the thing that I know, because I have experience with these kinds of patterns, is that when there are 2 positions where you see 3 of the same thing around it, there's going to be a third. So this central position we see alternating. Okay, here we have an open triangle on the back, here we have an open triangle on the front, here open on the back, here open on the front, and that alternation repeats going around. So this is going to the cluster of 4 that's all in the back, and then here we have a cluster of 4 where we have our closed triangle twist in the center of the cluster on the opposite side from the open triangle twists. So those are the 3 things that are going on. And like from those 3 corners, we get alternation between going to the clusters of 6 and the other cluster of 4. Cluster of 6, other cluster of 4, cluster of 6, other cluster of 4. And that's true for the first cluster of 4 that we found also. So what's going on under the hood, if we look at the tiling, is we've got this group of 6, and I have 2 different colors, 2 different greens, because that's, or on screen for you, 2 different greens, because it's not just closed triangle twist, it's right-handed closed triangle twist and left-handed closed triangle twists. And then we have a blue cluster of 4 and a yellow cluster of 4. And then if I break that down, and I reoriented my tiles here to say, okay, how does that match with the crease pattern specifically? Then I'm looking for, okay, when I have a pleat in the crease pattern, that pleat is going to cross the tile boundary perpendicularly. So looking at this chunk, which has all of the different pieces needed for the whole tessellation, I can say, okay, I'm going to see 3 pleats exiting the chunk in that up and to the left direction, and indeed I see 1, 2, 3. Likewise, over here I can say, okay, I'm going to see 2 pleats going this way and then 1 going up. 2 pleats going that way, 1 going up. And this is how I'm abstracting the specific pattern into a broader set of ideas that's simpler to look at, where I can say, okay, now back to the full thing, what I want to do here is start in the center and then add 1 layer at a time as I go around. So we're going to do precisely that. And I'm going to copy these down here, and I'm going to rotate them back into the same orientation that they were originally, just because it's going to fit better on the screen. And I'm going to start with these 6 in the center, and then we're going to add to that as needed as we're folding. So coming back to the crease pattern, the other thing the crease pattern's really good for is setting up our initial twists. So crease patterns have 3 things going on. They have what twists are present, how they're connected, and how far apart they are. That's really all of the information that you get from the crease pattern. And that second bit, how they're connected, that's the tiling. And you can also see things in the crease pattern like what are the symmetry points, but that's additional information that has to be interpreted. It's not exactly given. So we're going to start folding, and I'm using 48 grid divisions here on Skytone paper, and you can see how to get Skytone paper. It doesn't come with the grid, unfortunately, but it is very nice for folding tessellations. So we're going to start with these 6 twists in the center, and if you've watched my tutorials before, you'll probably guess that we're not going to fold all 6 of those at the same time, and we're not going to pre-crease them either. So I just was looking at my grid lines and found the very center of my paper. I'm going to rotate my grid so I'm matching the background grid of the crease pattern. So I have one direction vertical. And then I'm going to have one space between my center and that long valley fold. And when I'm drawing on my paper, I'm going to draw my mountain folds into the center of the twists. So I'm drawing this mountain in, and then 2 spaces over is the next 3-way intersection of mountain folds. We don't really see these mountain folds inside of here, but that is the setup step for starting these closed triangle twists. So I'm going to start with the right-handed twist. It's this one that my finger's on. And I'm going to start by finding that 3-way intersection of mountain folds. And And another way to find this without drawing on the paper is to say, okay, that's my center point. My mountain fold here is 2 spaces away. When I send this pleat out to the corner of the paper, that is going to hit with the valley fold 1 space from the corner, and the mountain additional space further. And then likewise, coming down below, my mountain is going to be 2 spaces out from the center, and this time my valley is going to be further away. So looking down at the corner, my mountain is 2 spaces out, my valley is further away. And with those two, you've specifically identified the grid intersection and can add in the third as well. And for completeness, that third one has the mountain going straight to the corner and the valley 1 space kind of above. And so once we have all of that in place, we can squash our closed triangle twist. And then open up. I have that next center of a triangle marked already. It's 1 space out from the corner of the existing twist. And this is going to be a left-handed twist. It's twisting around in the opposite direction. And squash. And from the tiling point of view, we have now folded 2 of these twists. We want to go around and get the rest of them. We know that we have the same distances between all of them, and we're going to have 1 space out from the corner of the previous twist to get to the center of the next twist. It really doesn't matter if you work around this way or this way. And we're going to be finding the next twist. Setting it up with our pleats firmly in place, then pressing just outside of the twist to squash. And here I have a slight preference for working from the top of the stairs. So if you think about it, this is the layer on the bottom, and then you step up, and then you step up. So this is the top of the stack of layers, which I often call the top of the stairs. And that's just going to give us a nicer overlap to open once we fold the next twist. So again, the center is 1 spacing out from the corner of the next one over. And squash. And now with this overlap, we are going to have 2 twists. So if you think about it in terms of the tiling, we have 4 of the twists, 4 of the tiles, and we're missing 2. We have our pleats coming together. And if I orient it the same way as the tiles, so here we have a horizontal pleat coming out of this tile. And in this specific situation, these twists look exactly like the tiles, but that's not necessarily going to be the case all the time. What's important is that the directions of the pleats match the perpendiculars of the edges of the tiles. So in order to complete the loop, we need to have those 2 twists joining us. I'm going to go ahead and group that back and copy that over so we have another copy when we need it. So I'm going to open the pleat overlap, creating an I-beam structure. And right now I'm doing this on my left-hand side, which is a little bit more of a struggle to keep the match with the tiling, but it doesn't matter. You can rotate it over to your right-hand side and work on it there as well. And what you're looking for is this I-beam structure, so capital letter I, with 2 spaces in the center. And we can lay that down flat on top and then take one of those pleats leading out to the edge, flip it over, keeping the mountain, switching the valley to the opposite side, and squash the new twist. Then likewise for the bottom intersection, we can flip that pleat over and squash our new closed triangle twist. So now we have our central group of 6, and we need to determine, okay, which of these pleats are going to open triangle twists on the front and which are going to open triangle twists on the back, because looking back at our summary, some are going to one and some are going to the other. And specifically, I want to look at this with the grid. So I'll come back to the crease pattern and we have this question, okay, which is which? And what I want to pay attention to is, am I matching the orientation of the crease pattern? It's not enough to say, okay, this pleat is vertical, therefore I've matched the orientation of the crease pattern. I need to pay attention to, okay, here I have a valley fold outside of the triangles. I'm going to need that to come over and match this valley fold outside the triangles over here. So now instead of this pleat being vertical, this one is. And that is the specific match to this crease pattern. Notice that each of these triangles has rotated since I like from the crease pattern into the twisted form, but the pleats are still all in the same orientations. So from there I can say, okay, on this pleat going up, I have an open triangle twist on the same side. The corner is 1 space away from the corner of my existing closed triangle twist. I can go ahead and mark that valley fold, which is this one here. And then the mountain is going to hit 1 spacing away. And because it's an open triangle twist, we're going to outline 1 grid triangle as we set up that twist. And squash. So coming back to the tiling, what I've done here is added 1 twist. And let's see how I set it up earlier. I said that, okay, the ones with the open triangle on the same side are the gold cluster. And so it might be tempting to say, okay, I'm adding the whole gold cluster. But that's not actually what we're going for right now. And actually, let's double check. Yeah, that is the orientation that I want for the gold cluster. Wanted to make sure that I didn't need to add it like this instead. So just double checking. Yeah, that is good to go. But we're not adding the whole cluster yet. So I'm going to ungroup that. We just added the one twist, and I can pull the rest away to wait for later. And what we want to do next is notice how we have a nice smooth shape here. We don't have anything that is like that's jagged. We don't have any edges that go in and then out again. That's our goal for adding layers on. And then for the next bit, instead of adding this whole thing, because that would go more than one layer out, I'm going to have these two and also borrow one from the blue cluster. And so that's a corner twist of the blue cluster. We're adding in this little layer around, and notice I'm not just adding the blue triangle, because that would leave me with the gold and the cream triangles just on their own. So that would make a jagged edge. So when I'm looking at my crease pattern and saying, okay, this gold cluster or yellow cluster, that's going to have the center twist on the opposite side of the open triangle. It's going to be in that direction. And then our next twist is going to be an open triangle back on this side. And I can revisit the crease pattern and say specifically that that closed triangle is going to have its center right at the corner of the existing open triangle. So once this valley fold is folded, this point ends up in the center of the closed triangle. So when I flip my paper over, I can say, okay, my closed triangle, because I have practice with these kinds of triangles. And by the way, when I flip the paper over, I grabbed the pleat that I'm going to be working on next. So I don't have to find that again. And I can say, okay, my closed triangle, that corner is going to come right to the hole of the open triangle. And then, so the corner is where the valley goes, the mountain comes to the center. I'm going to find all three pleats of my new triangle twist. This is going to cause a pleat overlap because we haven't added all three of these twists yet. We're just adding this gold one. And so there's going to be a pleat overlap where these two go. And then I can squash my new triangle twist. And flipping back over, I'll deal with this pleat overlap. And what are the identities of these twists? Well, it's going to be this tan or cream. Keep coming up with new colors for this. It's going to be the cream, and it's going to be the light blue, which is another copy of this open triangle on the front, rotationally symmetric around that closed triangle hole, and it's going to be an open triangle on the back. So, knowing that, I'm going to have the valley fold for my open triangle coming out of that closed triangle hole. The mountain one space further, and then we're going to be outlining that one grid triangle. And what I'm going to do when I'm setting this up, instead of just running the pleat straight through, which I could, I'm going to do a triangle wrap where I let this pleat that's kind of floating on top above this new pleat that's coming in. I'm going to erase that back and back and back until it hits the new pleat and wraps around. And then I can squash my open triangle twist. And the reason why I did the triangle wrap instead of opening the pleat and bringing these mountain folds together to form a three-way intersection on this side is because I know that that next twist is on the other side of the paper. And then flipping over, I'm going to shift my mountain one space over to make this an open triangle, putting the valley on the far side, and squash. So from here, if we come back down, the next bits we need to add are coming around here. So we're going to have more pieces of our blue cluster, and we're also going to have the next start of a yellow cluster. So remember, around the center it goes to open triangle on the front, open triangle on the back, open triangle on the front, and repeats like that. So with this cluster on the back, all of the twists are on the back. The central twist was a closed triangle. So we're doing the center of the blue cluster, which is a closed triangle on the side we were already on. And squash. And then our next blue cluster corner, which is another open triangle on this side. And this one, when we do our next twist, we know that's going to be one of these cream triangles, which is an open triangle on the other side. So when we run this pleat into the next pleat, we're going to do a triangle wrap. And then flipping over, got that triangle wrap there. I'm going to shift the mountain one spacing over, putting the valley on the far side, turning that wrap into an open triangle twist. So we're going to repeat those steps then. We're back to a position that's the exact same as where we started. And so our next steps are to continue the cluster and add the corner of the next blue cluster. So off of this triangle, we're going to flip to the other side because the center of the yellow cluster has a closed triangle twist on the opposite side. And here I'm really starting to emphasize more the decision making of what goes where and when, and less the actual steps. So I do expect you to be comfortable putting in open and closed triangle twists to follow this, because otherwise it would take 2 hours. And then we're going to flip back over to put in that cream corner of the yellow cluster as an open triangle twist that is also having a corner at the closed triangle hole that we just put in, and doing a triangle wrap instead of a pleat overlap at the next place where these pleats are meeting, and squash. And then flipping over, that next twist is going to be a corner of a blue cluster So it's going to be an open triangle twist on this side of the paper. And then we're adding in next, I'll just duplicate these one at a time. We're going to add another center of a blue cluster off of this pleat of the twist we just finished. And squash. And then we're going to add another corner of a blue cluster, which is and by the way, I just want to draw attention to like that blue twist in the center before I said we're going to add that next corner. This is leaving 120 degrees between like as a gap in the tiling, and for that I did a pleat overlap. Now when I'm putting the next twist in, this is leaving a 60-degree gap, and I'm going to do a triangle wrap. So the gaps in the tiling are complementary to gaps, or I think supplementary rather, one of those. When the tiling gap is 120 degrees, the pleats that are converging will be at 60 degrees. When the tiling gap is 60 degrees, the pleats coming together will be at 120 degrees. So whether that's complementary or supplementary, someone with a more recent geometry class will have to remind me. So we've done these. The next thing to add is a cream corner of the yellow cluster. And notice that's going to get us back to a nice smooth shape. So flipping over, so we should expect, since we have a smooth shape in the tiling, we will not have any pleat overlaps. And as predicted, no pleat overlaps. And now this last edge, we have 3 tiles bordering the edge, and we have 3 pleats coming out. 2 of them are coming from these cream twists, cream tiles, and one's coming from the central cluster. So I'm going to start on the pleat that I just was working on, and the next thing to add there is the center of the cluster. And so that's going to be a closed triangle twist on the opposite side of the paper. And squash. And then the next thing I'll add is another corner of the yellow cluster. So flipping back over here, and I need an awareness that what I'm going to add after is a, oh, did I just take that without duplicating? What I'm going to add after is a corner of the blue cluster, and I need to know that because I need to know whether to do a triangle wrap or a 3-way intersection of mountains. Triangle wrap is a 3-way intersection of valleys, so it comes out to the same thing. It's just, is that going to be on this side of the paper or the other side of the paper? So then when I flip over and I resolve that wrap into an open triangle twist for that blue tile, then I can say, okay, what are the next 2 twists to add? And in this context, oh, duplicate first, that is a blue center and a blue corner, and I have these two pleats overlapping. The blue center is on the same side as the blue corner, and it's going to be a closed twist. The next blue corner is going to be an open twist. I'm going to let that closed one lay down flat while I squash the open twist, and then I can flip the pleat back and squash the closed twist. So that is what's going on in this situation. And I'm going to switch us back here for a moment while I set up the possibility of seeing your questions in the chat at the same time as I'm looking at these tilings. And whoop, no questions in the chat right now. And let's continue onwards, adding even more around this center. So I just finished these two twists. That kind of puts me on a trajectory to continue around this way. And so I need to look and see, okay, what's the next thing out from this blue corner? Well, I can look back at this blue corner and say, well, the next thing out is a light green. So I can take my, my green twist there, and I'm going to say, okay, if I'm going this way from a light blue, that is in this side of the center, that's going to be a light green. What does that mean? Well, it's going to be one of the central twists. So I'm going to take this and flip over to the other side of the paper. And now I need to see, okay, from this identical copy, how far over am I going? And that is 2 spaces to the corner, which means a third from the corner of the open hole to get to the center of that next twist. And now anything that I do on the paper is going to have an example somewhere else on the paper of an exact copy that I can replicate. So I'm actually going to come back here and stay here, and we can figure out what that means for the tiling a bit further on. And so, yeah, we do have one question. Thanks, Chris. So is the same twist used on the same side for one color? Yes, each tile color is uniquely tied to, say, a right-handed closed triangle twist on the front, or a right-handed, so that would be the light green tile. And then the dark green tile would be, I'm going to actually switch us back to the screen for a moment. So here we have the precise kind of definition of each tile, where the cream is this right-handed open triangle on the front. The gold is the left-handed closed triangle on the back in the center of that cluster. The light blue is the left-handed open triangle on the back. The dark blue is this right-handed closed triangle on the back. The light green is the right-handed closed triangle on the front, and the dark green is this left-handed closed triangle on the front. And so those are very specifically tied to both handedness, side of the paper, and relationship to all of the other twists. So I can say from the coloring that none of the green twists is in a position of rotational symmetry. The dark blue and gold twists are in positions of threefold rotational symmetry. And the third position of threefold rotational symmetry is in the center of the group of 6 green twists. So our positions of symmetry here are in the center of the 6 closed triangles and in the center of the 2 closed triangles on the back. And those 3 positions form an equilateral triangle. So continuing with our folding, one of the patterns that we've seen so far is we set up one twist and then we need 2 twists to resolve it, and that kind of cascades. So we have 2 twists to resolve that and then 2 twists to resolve that as we're cascading down the sets of pleat overlaps. And so then it's just a matter of which twists are we using to resolve these things. And so we saw that this closed triangle is an exact copy of this one around the center. So the twist it goes to is another copy of the central twist, and then it's going to go to a this would be a cream color triangle that is the open triangle on the front. And we're going to have a valley fold passing all the way through because both of these have corners as close as possible to the next thing over. And when I open this up, I'm going to have a closed twist on the top, open twist on the bottom, and squash the open and then the closed, because the closed can fold over flat while keeping all of the mountain folds in the same place. And one of the things that I'm noticing here is that it might be, so this is the kind of thing that you start to notice around the second ring around the center, is maybe the direction that you initially picked to go around isn't the easiest direction. At this point, I'm not 100% convinced one way or the other. So I'm just going to go ahead and continue onwards and say, okay, this is the next twist around. So I'm going to start on this pleat, and I want to be very careful to say this pleat is not the same as this pleat. So these 2 twists are around a center, and one pleat goes to one thing, one pleat goes to a completely different thing. So I want to have that in mind, have that awareness that, like, just because it's a corner of a cluster of 4 does not mean it's doing the same thing from each of those pleats. And likewise, I can say both of these corners, these 2 pleats that are not going into the center of the cluster of 4, they're both doing different things, which we can also see in the center. So on this next plate, I'm going to an open triangle on the back because I can see that this is my situation, and I'm going to that open triangle. So I'm going to go ahead and flip the paper over. And so from here, I'm looking and seeing how many spaces out do I need to go. And the corner of that twist is 1 space out from the open hole. So I can go ahead and here I'm creating lots of pleat overlaps. And really, the thing that would make me change directions of working around the center is if I put in this twist and that overlap goes through existing twists. Then I'm going to say, okay, let's work in the other direction. But as long as that's working, I'm happy to keep going this way. And so from here, we had our gold cluster. We're getting into a blue cluster, and we're headed into twists in the center, actually. So we need 2 of the green twists to resolve this overlap. And I know that because I'm coming from this identical situation into the open triangle, and that's going out, and these pleats are coming together, and I need 2 twists to resolve it, and they're both going to be on this side. And opening up, I'm going to need 2 spaces between the closed triangle centers. And these are going to be very close together. I'm going to cheat a little bit by lifting this flap while I squash the twist below, just because that flap takes longer to get to anything, but I'm being very careful not to undo the open triangle. I'm not fully flipping it over, just giving myself some extra space and then putting it back to squash the twist above. And now we have a pleat overlap, and what 2 twists are required to resolve that overlap? Well, here we have the start of a cluster of 6, and down here we have most of a cluster of 4. It looks like I'm going to need a closed triangle on this side that's part of the cluster of 6, and an open triangle on the back side that's part of the cluster of 4. So I'm going to set up that closed triangle up here, and because this twist is going to be on the other side, I'm going to put in a triangle wrap, squash my twist on this side, and flip over and squash my twist on the other side. And from here, I can already say if I want to continue working off of this pleat, I'm going to need to go to the other side, because the corners of this cluster always go to twists on the other side. I can be a little bit more specific than that though, and say, okay, this corner went to a copy of the center, just like that one. So the other one is going to go to a twist on the other side. And so flipping over, I'm going to have the same spacing that I saw before. But let me see, there's a specific copy. So we've got our closed triangle, open triangle, we're going over. We have 1 space outside of the hole, the open triangle hole, to hit the corner of the next twist. And as I set up this twist, I have all kinds of pleat overlaps. And squash. So from there, I'm coming into 2 copies of the central twist. So from here, coming into the center. And I'm going to open this up. I have those 2 spaces between the 3-way intersections, which is required for my central twists. This time it'll be a bit easier to squash these since the valley fold is kind of on the inside instead of the outside. I'm going to go ahead and have this lower pleat be in the correct orientation first, because it has a pleat overlap on it and I don't want to be flipping it over. And then squash the one on top. And now we're coming into the next pleat overlap. And here we're going to need another twist from the central cluster. And we'll finish this cluster of 4, which has an open triangle on this side. And squash. So then, working my way around, this is the twist that starts the next set of parallel pleats, and we don't want to go into another central twist. We want to go to a cluster 4 on the other side. So I'm going to flip the paper over, keeping that pleat in my right hand. And again, that's going to be 1 spacing out from the corner of the existing open triangle to the corner of the new open triangle twist. And it's going to create a lot of pleat overlaps. And then from here, we're headed into, like we saw before, we're headed into 2 of the central twists, the green tiles, and opening up, I have those 2 grid spacings. And I'm going to squash as cleanly as I can, and in this case that means lifting the pleat coming from the open triangle on the opposite side temporarily, and then putting it back to squash the second closed triangle twist. And I'm going to need a 3rd triangle in that cluster, like we've seen already. We're going to end up with 3 of the central cluster in this ring around the center on each edge. And my next twist is going to complete this cluster of 4, which means it's an open triangle on the opposite side of the paper. So I'm going to speed run the next 2 edges a bit so we get through the next ring around the center, or at least 2 edges of it. And by the way, I think I mentioned this a couple places, but this is a pattern that I designed specifically for this tutorial, and I have not folded it before. I am also following the algorithm of, okay, I figure out based on the rest of the pattern what single twist is needed to kick off the layer added on a set of parallel pleats, and then working from there, I'm resolving the pleat overlaps with 2 twists each time, making sure to comply with the pattern requirements. And I'm picking up some extra signal along the way, such as each of these edges is starting with flipping the paper over and putting an open triangle twist that specific space away from the open triangle on the other side. And I'm picking up things like, after that, I'm going to have 2 twists that match with the central cluster. And then after that, I'm going to have the 3rd twist in the central cluster and finish a cluster of 4. So there's a little bit of learning involved, but it's mostly executing this algorithm, really, that's determining what I need where. And here I'm getting back to the back around to where I started. So there's a few extra steps. I'm not stopping here. I'm continuing on with an additional pleat overlap, which will be an open triangle on the flip side and finishing the 3 closed triangles in a group that matches the center. Okay, so let's take a look back at our tiling for a moment and see, okay, how much did we get in that next bit around the center? So in each of our edges, we have this much of the central cluster, and then we're adding in some more there, and it's gonna look a little funny as I'm duplicating, but we're adding in the next bit around there. We're going to also have a corner of the next cluster of 4. So you can see around here in each of these corners, there's one isolated open triangle that's not part of any of these completed clusters of 4. And then that is going to get us around the ring. I'm gonna copy this and pull out my rotation menu. And that's gonna copy around the center. So then our next ring around the center, we have half of our clusters of 6. We can expect, if we have half of it, our next layer that we add will complete those clusters of 6. We have 1 point of the clusters of 4. Our next ring around the center is going to complete those clusters of 4 that we started. And there's going to be some other stuff going on too. So if I say, okay, that cluster is going to get completed, and that cluster is going to get, duplicate. That cluster is going to get completed. That's still leaving a gap that I'm going to need to fill with another triangle. But that's the broad strokes of what I can expect in the next ring around the center. I know it has been an hour, but I'm going to go ahead and fold at least 2 edges of that. And yeah, so Chris, great question. Where you create a lot of pleat overlaps, that is exactly with these triangle twist patterns. If I was working in a setup that had twists mostly alternating sides, that is where I can set up a bunch of stuff at the same time. For this since it is a bit of a more complex structure, I'm avoiding the setting up many things at the same time. But that is where I would do that. So I've got a set of parallel pleats. I want to add the next twists. And I'm going to start conveniently at the top of the stairs, where I'm going to be adding a closed triangle twist that is part of this cluster of 6. And then I'll be completing the cluster of 6 with my next 2 twists. So for example, even if I wanted to set up all 3 of these twists that I've just done at the same time, it would be really difficult to squash them because they're all on the same side and so close together. So I actually prefer to do 1 and then the 2 in that situation. In here, so this is feeding down, the next 2 twists that are needed are both on the other side. So I'm going to flip over, and that's going to lead me to a closed twist in the center of this cluster of 4 and an open twist further out. And this is another kind of tough squashing situation where I'm letting the closed twist fold over and fold as flat as possible and try and get this corner of the open twist to squash well before squashing the closed twist. And then I'm through that set of parallel pleats and on to the next. Starting down here, I need another copy of these open triangles. Which is creating a lot of pleat overlaps. But when I'm looking at that, I'm seeing, okay, these 2 pleats coming together are the same as these 2 pleats coming together. I'm going to need 2 twists on the opposite side to resolve that. So I'm not going to do any wraps there. I'm going to come in and say, okay, opening that up, I need a closed triangle for my cluster of 6 and an open triangle for that next cluster of 4. And squash those. And then I'm opening up the next pleat overlap. Slightly less than friendly overlap to squash. But in this situation, I don't mind actually if I fold one of these triangles in half to let everything lay down flat while I squash the other triangle, because folding this triangle in half does not introduce any new crease lines. And then coming down here, I need another open triangle on this side. And one way I can see that is I'm alternating this side, other side, this side, other side, must be this side. And then the next twist is going to be the center of this cluster of 4, which is a closed triangle on the other side. And that's where we pull in, or we bring in a wrap. And flip and squash. So next up, I want to start on this new pleat from my latest twist. It's giving me a new set of parallel pleats. And I'm going to need to flip over because those next twists are all on the opposite side of the paper. I'm going to be finishing this cluster of 4. So one of the things that you can notice with the tiling is that our repeats aren't necessarily aligned with the tiling break. So that's something we can notice in the tiling as well. Might get into that in a moment. Here, we actually do have a situation where we will need a triangle wrap. I have one twist on this side, one twist on the other side. And I'm going to go ahead and set up the closed triangle on this side, wrap around to the twist on the other side. And there's options. It's a little bit arbitrary. Do I go ahead and squash that twist now, or do I wait until I flip the paper over next? I'm going to go ahead and do it now so I don't forget it, because that does sometimes happen, especially if I'm not doing another ring around. And then flipping back, I can complete the cluster of 6. So what I was getting at with the clusters of 6 not lining up with each other on tiling breaks is that we're going like around the corner and around to get to the next one. They're not in line on the same set of parallel plates. And that means that as long as you're folding with tiling breaks and going for a pleated border, you will not have repeats of the pattern aligned with the edge of the paper. And that is perfectly fine. Like, these are infinite patterns. It's always going to have some edge. And yeah, there's a little bit of tension in my mind between explaining the tiling stuff and explaining what I'm folding as I'm folding it. But I'm going to move quickly around through here because we have actually seen all of these steps already. We saw when I added to the tiling after that last ring around the center, that once you see the first 2 edges, you've seen everything that's going to happen, with the exception of like the approach into the last twist at the end. And so based on those first 2 edges that I've already worked, we've seen all the moves already. So here we're at that difficult open where I'm going to be peeling back one of these triangles, folding it in half, which thankfully there's already a grid line for, or I wouldn't be doing that, to get these triangles squashed cleanly. And then getting into the open triangle leading to the triangle wrap that is at the center of the next cluster of 4. So once you're super comfortable folding the patterns, you might become more focused on how to create things with nice borders. And looking at the tiling helps you there too. So with these, if I left the border at this stage, I would have like really small border over here, really big border over here. And sure, that's a great aesthetic. It's not my typical aesthetic, I prefer a more even border all the way around. And the tiling is what tells me how to do that. Because in looking at the crease pattern, I can find ways to set up my grid that match with whatever orientation the tiling break has with the grid. And then I'm able to just have that set up on my paper so that the paper then matches, those are going to be on this side too, then matches whatever I want to fold on it. But that's getting into some advanced grid planning, project planning topics. This approach of looking at the tiling, not only does it help you decipher and simplify crease patterns, and helps tell you what to fold next and whether there's going to be a wrap and like how things are going to line up with the border. But that's also the information that's needed to create new designs. So when I was looking at the crease pattern in the beginning and saying, okay, this is here, that is here, the other is here, I could easily have worked the other way around and said, okay, I want this tiling pattern, so I'm going to fill in twists that help me get there. And that's actually how I designed this pattern. I said, I want a triangle twist tessellation in this symmetry structure in the triangles tiling because it matches with a couple of the pieces from Advent of Tess this year, with swirling pyramids and the alternate ending in the Advent of Tess 24 ebook. And so I want to be very explicit about showing that, and also these tiling diagrams that I included in the Advent of Tess ebook, and also in the new Tessellation Academy ebook, and taking a look and seeing, okay, how do you actually use those in your folding? So it all comes together. Like when you're folding, you can use these tilings to see what's coming next. If you've identified all of the distinct positions in a pattern, and when you're designing, you can use it to say, okay, I want this structure. Now let's fill it with distinct choices. So thinking about tilings really bridges the gap between a crease pattern, a folded piece, and this design mindset of, okay, this is how things are really working under the hood. And so on some level, it is important to have an understanding of how things are working under the hood to do the folding. And that same understanding is what helps you to then design your own patterns. And there's a little bit of additional things, like I had mentioned in the very beginning, that the three positions of threefold rotational symmetry form an equilateral triangle. And I mean that very strictly. It's always precisely an equilateral triangle in order for the pattern to repeat. Like that's just a mathematical rule. And so that's the additional piece of information on top of the tilings that is needed to verify that the design will indeed repeat, instead of guessing and moving the twists around in crease pattern form to see what happens. Okay, so that's all for this pattern. This one is named Artificial Reef. And again, I used a 48 fold triangle grid on Skytone paper. You can find more info on how to get the Skytone paper that I like, and how to access some of these other resources I mentioned, like Tessellation Starter Sequence, Tessellation Academy, and Tessellations by Tiles, where I teach more patterns and design skills in this style using the tilings. And I'll also put the links to the Advent of Tess 20, well, I'll do one link to all of my ebooks that have crease patterns that can be interpreted and then folded in this way also. This is particularly relevant to the Tessellation Academy Volume 1 ebook that just came out, because there's a whole topic in there on different arrangements of triangle twists, including this arrangement with clusters of 6 and 2 clusters of 4 triangle twists. So happy folding, everyone. I will see you next week for live folding a pattern that was inspired by some of the designs that I was making for Advent of Tess this last year. And yeah, I hope you go and fold many tessellations this week. Happy folding. See you in